Justin, your video just froze. Okay.
We should be live, I think.
Yeah, I think we are live.
All right,
So,
perfect.
hello everyone. Welcome to the session about the Ubuntu Component Store. Let me start off with giving a brief introduction to what it is. The Component Store is essentially a place where developers can add and use components that are common to several applications. So, for instance, you could have a welcome visit or an empty state that other developers might have created, and you wouldn't have to create it from scratch. The point of this is to reduce code duplication, and also is meant to ease up development, to reduce the startup time of getting your application. I got. Could you give me a second? I forgot to close my window. All right. So in my previous summit, in the previous Ubuntu Online Summit, I created a prototype of the Ubuntu Component Store where we showed off curated components where developers can add components to the store after a extensive code review. And we had quite a healthy discussion last time where we thought, okay, that shouldn't be the only way to go. And Stuart came up with another idea of having the community store where developers can add components to the component store by not doing any sort of code review, and they can host the code on their own in any place that they want to, either GitHub or Launchpad, and make it still available to all the developers. And this would essentially reduce the review time. It would make sure that the components are instantly uploaded to the store. In a way, it's comparable to the Ubuntu store where you submit applications. Previously, the manual review slowed down the whole process by quite a lot of time, and we've learned that lesson with the component store as well. Right now, the way we had it was in the curated store, the developers had to ensure that every component had documentation, we wanted tests as well for the components, and we wanted a good, basically the curated components will be well supported, and if it's deprecated, then it will be done in a proper fashion such that application developers are not left in the cold. While this is beneficial, it does bring a minimum quality to the components being added to the store. It also, in a way, impeded the rate at which components were added to the store as well. And that's where we sort of brought a change. We wanted to have two kinds of components. One are the curated components, which go through the extensive review that I just talked about. And while at the same time, we also have a community channel where people can add components to the store via just a command, where you can just say ECS submit, and then you give it a Launchpad branch or a GitHub branch, and you can update it on your own time, your own frequency, and at the same time, the developers who are using your component can continue to do so and be updated using, again, the ECS command. So, Stuart, do you want to talk more about the community channel and give your motivations as to how we did?
The goal here is we're expecting that most people who are going to be building applications for Ubuntu are not necessarily going to be hugely super technical platform developer type of people. So the idea is that we build a library of components, as Nikolash has already said, things that are useful and reusable. The curated store is there very much to say. The curated store is basically auditioning to be in the SDK. Right? It's things where you build something and then it gets a lot of use, and then Zoltan and the SDK team say, we'd like that in the SDK. Let's just pick it up and make it part of the Ubuntu platform itself. The community store is not like that. The community store is much more like PyPy or NPM or CPAN if you're a Perl person, whatever. The idea is anyone can publish things to it, and then you decide to use them as a developer based on reading about it, deciding whether you trust it, seeing whether other people use it, that kind of thing. But the important point is that this is aimed at people who are not themselves hardcore C developers. So, QML is, in some ways, brilliant, but in some ways it's quite limited. There's a whole bunch of stuff that it can't do. It can't read files. It can't play with your settings. It can't get system settings from anywhere. It can't write files. And when you want to do that sort of thing, what you actually want to do is just essentially grab a component, which is a small single-use thing, which does it for you. In the same way, you may want to reuse a QML component, something that someone's already built because it's really useful, the sorts of things that are in the curated store. So Mike Hall mentioned in the previous session about an about page, which automatically picks up its information from your manifest.json, as an example. Or a lot of the bottom edge component stuff that are in the curated store. Again, people should be able to build these things and submit them. And then I, as a developer, I shouldn't have to know how they work. I shouldn't have to know what to do. I just type UCS, install the name of the component, and it installs it in my project, and nothing else changes. I don't have to write make files for it. I don't have to ever look at its code. Nothing. I don't have to compile anything, right? If I've got a pure QML project and I'm not doing any compilation, this should not make it into a project where I suddenly have to compile things and understand C. It should just be trivial to search for a component, find one that does what I want, add it to my project with basically one click, and then go ahead and use it. That's the goal of the community store. That makes sense? The SDK team and the philosophy of the community store have some disagreements, which is something we probably ought to discuss. But the principle that I'm describing is precisely that. I just type UCS install, name of the component, it gets added to my project. I can then just import it and use it exactly as if it was part of the SDK. You know, I don't have to, if I'm building a QML app and I decide I want to use the theme stuff that's provided by the SDK, I'll just do import theme and then run it. I never have to think about, is this written in C++? Do I have to compile it? Do I add it to my make file? I don't have to understand any of that, which is good because I don't, and most developers don't. This is not aimed at people who are doing hardcore hacking of their own make files, because anyone who's doing that doesn't need a component store. They just go and grab some source code off GitHub and copy it in. This is aimed at people who do not understand that stuff and should not have to, which I think is the majority of developers.
Well, I think it should cover both cases. I mean, the thing is, like, one of the advantages of the component store is that it helps people discover new components that they might not be aware of, because finding a random GitHub project where they can find a component which can do a certain thing is not as easy as listing such a component in the component store, where it's one centralized place to find it all.
Yeah. It's good. It's good for discovery in the same way that app stores are. I completely agree with you. The key point, I have no problem if people who could have done this themselves find their lives easier by using the component store. What I don't want to do is make it better for the people who could have done it themselves at the expense of those who cannot. Because it's the ones who cannot, the majority of developers, who are the people who need this and actually need our help and need a way of, we need to make the path to building Ubuntu apps as simple as possible.
Yeah, I agree.
And making people understand QMake and C++ when all they want to do is write something in QML is not making it as easy as possible. It's basically turning everyone into a platform developer, which I am massively against.
I think that part, I think we fully agree. That's true. That's basically true. Just for like historical background, that so the whole problem, what it came out is that this beautiful confinement, application confinement, what we implemented in the Ubuntu phone, actually comes without dependencies. So you cannot, as you said, there is no platform development in the sense of Ubuntu SDK. in that way. So in the older Ubuntu way, you could create a library and you could push that library to the distro, and it ended up on the archives, and applications could depend on that. And when you install the application, it pulled those libraries and components. So that was the old model, which obviously does not work with the click world, and it will a little bit work with the snappy world. So that's going to be a little bit different story there. Anyhow, so I do agree with that, and after I tested and played with the UCS, I think it's mostly great, and it's okay. I think when it comes to, I mean, not kidding, when it comes to QML components, I think it's just perfect. I mean, we should integrate it as far. I mean, okay, so just to give a context, what we are talking about is that when and how to integrate it to our Ubuntu SDK IDE. So what I want to offer to you guys is that I'm opening a simple template application, the most simple one, and I say that okay, it's hello world, but you know, I want to add there something which fun. So I want to right click there, and I want to see that, oh, UCS, show me what's there, and it shows me like funny components, and I said, all right, great, a candle, beautiful. I want a candle light there because I love candle applications, so I can just easily inject components and functions, so I can extend my applications in a visual way. So that's all brilliant. We want that. As long as it goes to QML components, I think it's doable. But stop me, please, Benjamin, if you disagree with that. But I think with QML components, it's fairly easy.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
And that's fine. The questions come when we are distributing libraries, so .so files, and I'm not against it, because I think at the end, when in the older Ubuntu way, when we said that okay, let's make this application depend on a library, then actually you were pulling in a binary library. You didn't download the source code for it. You didn't ask the developer to build that library. That's not really like Arch Linux or Gentoo, you know. So you were depending on a binary library. So let's keep it, but remember that with the older Ubuntu, and actually other Ubuntu we are using, to entering a library, a binary library to the archives requires certain quality measures. And I don't want to do it like very heavy, but let's just go through just easily that what are the issues that can come up with the binary distribution. I know that UCS distributes binaries for technically all three architectures. That's great. So you have RMJF binary. How do you guarantee that a binary is actually compatible with the platform? Because yeah, you see that so what's the answer for it? I say that we have 1409, 1504, 1510. We will have even more. We will have different devices, BQ, Meizu, whatsoever. So we really want to make sure that the binary is actually compatible with the device. So how do you make sure that?
That's one of the things where part of the reason that I wanted to put this session together is precisely because I'm not a hardcore platform developer person. There's a whole bunch of stuff I don't know how to do very easily. So at that point I don't know. I mean, I'm assuming you will build your component. The person who builds their component, who is a C++ person, builds it against a particular release of the SDK. And releases of the SDK never go away, right? So if you want to do, there is the risk that I publish a component for 1504 and then someone pulls it down and puts it in an app and publishes that as a 1410 app, and then that doesn't work. But the developer's testing should pick that up, right? You build a component against a particular reason. I mean, maybe we want different versions of the component for different releases of the SDK as well as different architectures, which sounds really annoying. I'd like to avoid that if we can, but if that's the thing we need to do, that's the thing we need to do.
I mean, Zoltan, can't we tie a specific binary of a component to the framework? So yeah, like the developer would have to create. I mean, right? See, at any point in time, there'll be a current stable framework and there'll be a development framework, right? There'll only be two frameworks at any time. So right now we have, well, 1504 framework and 1510 technically. So the binaries that are built would have to be built for ARM and I guess AMD 64 for these two frameworks alone.
And i386 for the emulator.
Yeah, true.
Yeah, if you want to test. I think your question is correct. Yes, I'm sure it's software, yeah? Everything is possible. So we should be able to somehow hook in the framework version, the framework name. So when I say that I want to inject this component to my application, then when I go to UCS, or the UCS goes to its own, then somewhere the framework will go, and I will get the right framework if it is available.
Yeah, true.
If it's not, then it might return that, sorry, you are using 1510 framework application. There is no binary for that framework. So I don't say it's not possible, but there should be some logic there.
So, I mean, that seems reasonable, and that's a whole bunch of stuff that I wasn't sure about.
I mean, the thing is, like, looking at the manifest file of an application, we can tell which framework it's being targeted against, and UCS being a Python script could read into that manifest file of an application and then, bring in the required binary for it, right?
Yeah.
Sorry, inverse clicking. Yeah, so I mean, the script certainly can do it. If we want to integrate it to the IDE, then we need to convince the IDE to handle it. So it should be integrated to the Qt creator at the end of the day. So that would be the thing. So that UCS should be a plugin itself. Or Benjamin, how do you see that?
Yeah, I agree. Should be a plugin on its own, probably.
Yeah.
But what I want you to say is, like, you compared the whole thing to the Ubuntu archive, but the difference between what we're talking about here and the Ubuntu archive is that you do not push your ready compiled binaries to the archive, but instead you push your code to the archive, and then or your code to the Launchpad, provide a Debian file for it, and then it's built by our builders for the archive, so we can make sure it's really built for this type of Ubuntu it should target. And that's the difference here, because I don't know if the developers of a component can upload the binary blob on his own, you have no way of knowing against what it was built and against what it was compiled. So that's the whole problem of why we were pointing that out, that for components that require native code, you run into some problems here.
I don't think those are insurmountable problems. Half the reason that Ubuntu builds everything on the servers itself is, yes, some of it is to make sure that everything all fits together and it all compiles together, but some of it is also so canonical, and the Ubuntu team can stand there and say that source code and that binary are definitely the same thing, because you have to trust us. But that's not what the component store is about. Don't think of it like the Ubuntu archive. Think of it like NPM or PyPy. I can upload wherever I want to that, right? You decide whether to trust it or not. That's up to you as a developer. No one is standing behind it going, every component in this is absolutely trustworthy and you are okay with it.
Well, there's something you have to be careful about, though. There's one thing if you're talking about community-provided components in general and in the namespace of a particular user, but as soon as we're talking about something that's called curated, that to me really raises the bar of expectations here, and really makes me personally think somebody double-check what's actually in there. And not just that one single person may have uploaded, somehow built it, I don't know exactly how, and maybe the first person to actually see what's happening and whose files get eaten by it, you know what I mean?
You have misunderstood. There are two bits to the component store, the curated bit and the community bit. The curated bit is maintained by the curation team, right? It doesn't contain any binary components. It never will contain any binary components. You have to, in order to get something into the curated store, become part of the curated team, agree to maintain it, agree there'll be tests, agree there'll be documentation. It's not a free-for-all, not at all. The community store is a free-for-all, and people using the community store should be aware, and I'm more than happy that they be made aware, that anyone could have uploaded this and you've got no guarantees it'll do what it says or that it will work.
So maybe it's worth clarifying. So at least to me, at least it's not fully clear what to expect from the curated component. Like what sort of QA is being done there? Who's building the binaries? Well, I mean, I assume there's going to be binaries at some point, right? So maybe maybe it's only possible to upload sources, but there'll have to be binaries for a lot of components there. So somebody has to be able to build them and verify that they are sane.
I personally am of the opinion that the curated store will never contain binary components, but that's more a Nicholas question than me.
Well, I mean, the thing is, right now, the way we did it is people who are interested in submitting curated components, they do a code review. I mean, they provide a merge proposal against the component store, and the members of the component store developer team, they look at it, they review the code, and if they think it's fine, then they approve it, and then it gets merged into the curated store. That's how we get new components into it. We haven't had yet any binary components yet, and so yeah, I haven't really given it too much thought into who would build the binary yet. That's something I need to think about.
So you potentially, I think, have a slight risk here, which is right now you may not actually support binaries that are curated. Sorry, components that have binary pieces and are curated. So people have to use the community provided ones, and that sort of means that there's never any sort of quality control being done on those, which to me seems a little bit problematic, right? If it's something that you really need and you don't really see much of a choice there, you may just decide to use it, especially if this is targeting somebody who doesn't really have the option of doing that on their own, basically.
Well, yeah, but what's the alternative is the SDK team employs 200 more people, and you build a load of binary components people want, and you check them really carefully, and you write tests and everything, which I'm all in favour of. It's just not me you've got to convince. It's REC to give you about 50 times as much budget as you've got. Right? The whole point of this is it doesn't do any other language or any other programming environment. It doesn't do them any harm that they have a big database of libraries that people have written and no one had to check them, right? The Python people, Keita van Rossum does not individually go and check every Python library submitted to PyPy to make sure that it's okay, nor should he have to. Everyone else is fine with this. It feels like we want to control all this stuff because we're just control freaks and we don't need to.
Well, it's not just that, but I like to think we do have a much higher bar than most platforms, in terms of the basis you're starting from. You know, the whole security model you start out with is much higher than it usually would be. So I think it's fair to at least see, you know, what can we do. For example, can we look into some sort of build-bot based thing that's running? You know, there's services out there, or there's a way to set up a server, for example, maybe paid for by donations, or maybe, you know, there's somebody, at least, you know, that could be asked nicely if there's some server capacity available from Launchpad, maybe something like that. Imagine at the least those are options I would really want to look at. You know, then at the least, if that's not possible, we know exactly why there are limitations there.
If you want to put some serious budget behind this and basically replicate the Ubuntu development model, where there are servers which does it, and then you employ sysadmins to deal with those servers and people who understand how it builds and everything. That's great. It just means it will not happen. The only people in the world capable of building that sort of thing for this project are Canonical, right? And you don't have the resources. The point of this is to build something which we can do without requiring all of that.
Right.
Because we don't, I really don't think we need all of that. But honestly, if you think, well, you know what, this is never going to take off unless it's all carefully monitored and run, and we get given all source code and we run build farms for loads of different architectures and so on, then the community store's just never going to take off. I would like that not to be the case.
So if I now pull a Python library from PyPy, it's already pre-built, or is it built on my machine to work?
I can't remember off the top of my head.
I think at least for CPAN, it's built on the machine when I pull it.
For NPM, it is as well, I think, and I'm fine with that. I'm more than happy to have people submit source code and have it pulled down and build on the machine, as long as the user doing the installation never, ever, ever has to think about that. I type npm install something, and that pulls the right thing, that pulls down the source code, it builds it all, and I've never had it fail. Not once. I've never had to think about it, right? But the people who would need to set that up are people who really understand how the build system works, which is you guys, the SDK team. If you want to build it, great. I just think if I say, okay, can you build this? You'll say, certainly we will do, and it won't happen until 2016 because you've got too much to do.
So what is the what is the problem with let's say like rehosting the binary blob source code there, and say when I say that UCS install module, that it pulls down the source tree of it, and it automatically injects to the because it can inject to the QMake files. It can. It's an average developer does not need to read the QMake files at all, ever. Really.
The problem, I'm fine with that. The problem with doing it that way is that everyone who has time to build UCS, which is me and Neklesh, don't know how to do that. And everyone who does know how to do that is on the SDK team and is too busy.
Wait a sec. So no, I have a plugin. I have a QML plugin source code, and I push it to the UCS attested, and then Benjamin pulls it and just builds it. You don't need any competence to do that.
Yeah. But here's the thing, Zoltan. The thing is, like, we don't want that additional step. I mean, like, we want developers to be on the same platform, whether they're experienced or they're new developers. As far as we're concerned, we want to provide a store where people can easily use these. So if we add in an additional step of the developer having to build these components, that's just increasing the complexity of it. That's our point, essentially. I mean, that's the reason why we are trying to do all this. I mean,
yeah, but we were talking about that the non-built QML project is going to fade out slowly at some point. So you will build even your QML project at some point. You will build, and for QMake, it's all the same if it's a QML project without C code or a QML project with a C++ code. You will need to build it. You need you already, for the QML project, you need a change route. It does not work without a change route.
Yeah, I agree.
There is no click packaging without a kit, because you need a kit for the target.
Yeah, I think me and Stuart are fine with the building process as long as it's done by the SDK. I mean, the Q creator essentially, like, seamlessly in the background. I think we are fine with that, right, Stuart?
Yeah. I mean, I'm absolutely fine with it happening.
Okay.
But everyone who is competent to do that can't help it.
No, it's not true, Stuart. You know it's not true. You install the Ubuntu SDK, open the QMake template, and just hit the green button, and it's done. You don't need to.
No. What he means is that, like, for instance, let's say you do UCS install binary component A, right? When you do that, we're grabbing the source code. Now we need to know exactly what changes we need to make to the CMake file or the QMake file in order to ensure that the SDK builds it, right?
Forget about CMake. CMake is not good for that anyway. But QMake, it's doable. You don't need to touch
honestly, we believe it's doable. We just don't know how.
Dude, no, sorry, I'm using the wrong terms. I mean, we can make it automatic.
Really?
Developer doesn't need to touch it.
So if we give the SDK a source folder and we tell it to add it to this QMake project, it'll do everything and it'll be able to seamlessly build it as well. Is that what you're trying to say?
Yes, but Benjamin, please correct me if I'm talking stupid.
Yeah. Well, the only requirement for that would be that the QMake project itself, that the developer of the component is uploading, does do the right make install step, so it will be in the right part of the final click package. But that's not the concern of the user at the end. So the guy who is developing the component needs to know how he's doing that.
Yeah, there are three players in this, right? There's the person who writes a component, the person who uses a component to build an app, and the eventual end user of the app.
Exactly.
The experience for the eventual end user of the app has to not change. The experience for the developer of the app has to not change. If it's difficult for people who develop components, I don't mind, right? But anyone who's developing a component should know what they're doing. I'm fine if they have to write QMake snippets, whatever. You're a component developer. Man up and understand it. That's great.
So if you look at the current simple app with QMake, you will see that it has a subdirectory that's named app or something like that. And on top it has a QMake file that has a variable called subdirs. Okay, now if we would pull a component from GUCS and putting the source code right into this root folder, all it had to do to integrate into the build process was to add, would be to add its own name to this subdirs variable. That's all. Then the QMake would pick it up and build it, as long as the component developer did his job right.
Right, and then to actually use that, so I type UCS install sil/command exec. That grabs a component from the store and it updates the QMake file in the folder that I'm in or whatever. You know, it finds the appropriate one for the app in the project that I'm in. It adds itself to the subdirs file, and then at the top of my QML file, I can just type import Ubuntu component store.sil.command exec 1.0 and use it. And I do nothing. I never look at C++. I never think about C++. Nothing.
If you don't want to.
Okay. That being the case, I think that's a brilliant idea. So it just becomes a work item for the SDK team. When can we have it, please?
Immediately when just show me. Okay, there are a few things we need to agree. I think the SDK side is something that we can schedule and put it in the roadmap, and we can agree that we deliver it at some point. We need to figure out when. But we need to agree on certain things when it comes to component creation. Like, we really need to make, for example, an API definition there. I don't want to see, I'm making difficult for component developers. I don't want to see components, C++ components, just, crazy format. I want there an API definition, a file which describes what API this library actually provides. We need to have checksum security on somewhere. So we need to make sure that actually the component what the developer is downloading, so UCS is downloading, that it's intact. Some kind of like read-only mode. So we need to be able to put some self-check that this is actually the library what you were downloading.
The way I've dealt with that particular point is when you submit a component to the store, you don't upload the source code. You submit a Launchpad branch URL.
Yeah.
Right? And then the store records the Launchpad branch URL and revision at the time you submit it. So what happens then? UCS install it goes to it hits the store's API and says, I want to install this. The store says, okay, here is the Launchpad branch URL and revision that you want. And then the UCS utility itself goes to Launchpad and gets it. So all the security and complexity and traceability and making sure nothing has changed and so on is handled because we're backed onto Launchpad. This is why UCS doesn't let you upload some random zip file, because then that would exactly be that problem.
Brilliant. I think I understand that. So it's good. It's good.
I'm not sure I agree that you have to document your component. It would be good if people did, but this is a market forces question, right? In the same way that projects on GitHub are much more useful if they have a README and some documentation. And if they haven't got a README and documentation, people won't use them. This is the same thing, right? This is, it's not like this. If you write a component and don't document it, no one's going to use it because no one will know how. So that's fine. You want to go ahead and submit it, not our problem. And we're not eating up disk space or bandwidth or anything for it. Launchpad's doing all of that. So we're okay.
Yeah, I mean, Zoltan, it's the same way the Ubuntu Touch store works, right? I mean, you have all sorts of applications being added to the store, but only the ones which shine, which do something really well, rises to the top, while the other ones just sink bottom. So the same would apply to the components as well. The ones which are not documented would not be used, would not become popular.
When you submit something to the store, your branch has to contain a manifest file, which is a JSON file called Ubuntu component store.json. And the store does check that you have certain keys in that file. And I'm happy to make one of them be API documentation URL or something. But you can't ensure that that's accurate. You just can't without manual review, which is the worst idea in history. So
let's make a preliminary compromise on that. So we are working on an API checker anyway. So let's push this requirement a bit further now. I don't know what Christian or Benjamin or what's your saying on that, but I think if we hand over a plugin structure that we say that in this format we expect the component to be, let's create few examples, and I think Benjamin, we can come up with a timeline, and it won't be crazy for supporting mysteriously created backends for that. So let's say that the first step wouldn't be the UI in the Qt creator, but the first step would be that if you make even UCS can learn to add that library.
Yeah. I think what would be a good prerequisite for this would be a having a description of some of these rules in each particular plugin. So, for instance, it could say the following framework is supposed to work. So that's at least, that there's the option of the component store failing outright if it's known that it's not going to build. So that's certainly easier for users. And for instance, it can say if it's supposed to export a C++ component or not, if there's something to build there. Or it can say if there's supposed to be documentation there. And, well, at least in the future, we can certainly, I think, look into building documentation of that code. I mean, it doesn't have to be there right away, same as doing API checking. But I think there would be things that should be doable in the future, as long as we have some idea where to start off with and have at least a minimal description of what each component is supposed to be doing.
You need the minimal description. If you type UCS search and then something, right, it searches the Ubuntu component store for the thing you've searched for. Right? If you don't fill in a description, your stuff won't come up in search and no one will ever know it exists. So,
right.
But the point is, social pressures are what enforce this. We don't say we're going to reject your component unless you provide this. You provide it without that, your component is useless, so nobody will. And if someone does, we don't care.
Well,
You know,
well, Stuart, what we could do is we could just add a small check to see the JSON file has those minimum requirements like
yeah,
name, a description,
which
and
we
we could
already
just,
have.
yeah, we could provide a warning saying, hey, your name and a description seems to be missing from your JSON file. Fill that in and perhaps submit again.
We already do have that. The existing UCS server, the UCS community submission server, checks for 3 or 4 different properties in the JSON file. It checks that the JSON file, the manifest JSON file exists. It checks you've got a name and a Launchpad branch URL, and I think it checks that you've got a description. It doesn't care what's in it, but it checks that you've got one. And broadening that check is fine.
Okay.
And the server is deliberately trivial and as stateless as I can possibly make it. So all of the, at the moment, the list of all of the components is stored in another big JSON file, which is stored on Launchpad, right? In the full, if it becomes NPM, then probably we'll want some kind of a proper server with a proper database backend and so on, but it just doesn't need it at the moment. And it means that because the server doesn't store files and it doesn't store state, it can be deployed really, really trivially, because every command which talks to the UCS submission server is just about 6 lines of Python, which looks in the JSON file it's got and then returns the output, and that's it. It's not difficult stuff. Code's all on Launchpad anyway. So if you want to look at it, go for it. But yeah, so to be clear, by the way, I'm not having a go at your team and saying that you don't want to do any of this. I just think that you've got 5,000 things to do and 4 people to do it with. So I was trying to do a way that we wouldn't have to require the SDK team to do something, because you've already got a million things. You've got a million things I want you to do, let alone every other developer in the world.
So, but to be very specific on that, this particular feature, or the lack of this feature, is one of my personal problems. So my stepping out from the head of SDK engineering manager role to be like the community dude, that I really want a model for sharing.
Yeah,
you know, this is something that Ubuntu and Linux and Debian and all, it's great about it, that you can share your libraries, you can let other people reuse your code in that way. It's brilliant. And with this very confined world, we somehow missed that part out. UCS is the answer for that. So if anybody's coming over and say that, okay, I'm creating a beautiful application, how I can share my reason, how I can share my code with people. The worst thing I should say that, yeah, just copy paste the code. That's like horrible. So the answer is that you made a beautiful component. Put it to public. So this is the answer. So I definitely think that this is one of the top features we can amaze people with, right?
That's exactly what I want. I want when someone decides they're going to write an app and they go to ask Ubuntu and they write, how do I shell out and run a command? The answer is UCS install Zoltan /command exec.
That's exactly it. So I definitely do want to keep it as like, this is a booster for making the Ubuntu application development a community experience and make the community backing stronger. So that's why I really want it. I think we have a good compromise on that QML components, piece of cake, right? So it's considered done.
Yeah.
For C++ plugin distribution, well, Stuart, you convinced me, and I think, I don't know where Christian and Benjamin said, but yeah, I mean, if the developers push screwed up plugin, which doesn't do anything, or broken, or doesn't build, then it won't be popular, so stupid.
And we do have an advantage here in that if someone deliberately tries to write a malicious component, they say this component returns the path to your home directory, right? And it's like, it should be 4 lines of C++, which just returns the result of QDIR paths, $home or whatever. But instead, it tries to do something evil. then if someone uses that component, puts it in their app and deploys their app to the store, the component can't do anything evil because all the apps are sandboxed. So an evil component can't be very evil because it only runs in confined apps.
Yeah, I'm thinking about that. Is it possible to do any kind of evil things anyway?
Yeah, this is.
I'm not stating. I'm thinking. Yeah.
Okay, I am convinced that the right thing to do is for people writing components to upload source code and have the SDK silently, quietly build the source code by magic when you install a component. And if we have people who understand how to do that and can devote time to it, then fantastic, let's do it that way. It will need your team or whoever's doing that to define the structure, as you said, of what a publishable component looks like. But that's fine. Write that down. The server can check that it meets that structure. And then everything. So there's no problem with the server saying you have to provide a file called build.qmake, which is your qmake snippet. You have to have your stuff in a folder called lib or whatever. And then UCS takes care of downloading it, putting it in the right place, making sure it's importable as ucs.sil.whatever. So we've got that namespacing, we've got the version numbers, that's all handled. If that's all doable, fantastic. I mean, I defined a structure for what uploadable components should look like, where QML stuff is in a folder called QML, and binary stuff is in a folder called QML lib. But that's stupid, and we should throw that away and redo it. And I'm fine with that. As long as components are self-contained, can be brought down and plugged into a project without the developer having to change anything. Brilliant.
Yeah. So Benjamin, what's your word on that? How do you see it?
Yeah, from what I think currently, it's totally possible, and I also don't see any problem in if there would be any changes that we need to do on the templates, we could do them. I mean, that would be possible. I don't see a problem, but I don't think that we need, because I tried to structure the templates in a way that you can easily add new sub-components to your project. So it should already work.
Yeah, precisely.
Should there be a variable, like we have a few special variables that QCreator knows of, basically to be sure that there's a defined folder name at least. Say, you never know what happens in the future. There may be a need to do other refinements to the templates, and maybe we want to, as a minimum, be sure what the correct folder name is that can be used to drop those components in.
Yeah, I mean, I'm assuming that when UCS downloads a component, it puts the source code in a folder. It creates a folder called Ubuntu Component Store, and then it puts all the components in there by name or something. So they're all carefully kept away from your actual application, and so on, and that's fine. Yeah, I'd completely expect that to be the case. I think it's quite annoying that that UCS will have to go and poke something into your existing QML dir, into your existing QMake file. If we're changing the templates, it would be nice if the QMake file, by default, looked in a folder called Ubuntu Component Store and discovered things, so UCS doesn't have to actually edit a file. I hate scripts which edit files you've already written.
Yeah, so that was sort of what I was trying to suggest here. If there's of all the templates that may be designated with a special line in the pre-existing QMake, for instance, and there's something basically that UCS can look for to know this is where I can drop files, and I know that QCreator will be using those and will be looking for those. So there's no need to actually touch any of the build system other than dropping a file or maybe a folder in there. Maybe
That's exactly how I'd certainly like it to work. Part of the reason that UCS doesn't handle QMake projects at the moment is I couldn't work out how to do that, but I don't know whether I can't do that because QMake can't do it, or because QMake can do it and I'm just too stupid to work it out. And I did ask some people, and I got a whole bunch of, why would you want to do that? You just understand QMake, right? Because you're a C++ developer.
Yeah, but remember that it's really... Sorry.
Well, one thing. If we do like have some code in QMake that automatically picks up existing directories, then you would need an additional step for the developer to do, because he needs to manually run QMake, because QMake doesn't have a crystal ball. It does not know, okay, now there's a new subdirectory I should know of, but it cannot know. So basically, if you change the root profile, it will know it because the timestamp changed. So it would rerun QMake automatically. But if you like just put a new file there in a subdirectory, there is no way to make that work.
True.
And
also, it doesn't rediscover things every time you build. But yeah, I mean, this is all sortable out. I mean, maybe it touches the top level file, or maybe the build process always looks in the Ubuntu component store folder, even if it doesn't exist, and traps the error, or I don't know. You got your team, you folks know more about that than I do. That's what's bad, Harry.
Guys, we're running out of time. We have another 5 minutes, so let's try to wrap this up. Okay, so the way I see it, what we discussed right now with just adding the source code and then having the SDK compile it automatically in the background is not possible for QML project types and CMake project types, because with CMake it's variable, like the project directory could be completely different, right? So this is only possible for QMake projects. And the way I see it, Zoltan, you mentioned that QML project types are going away, and CMake is not really the preferred default type anyway. So I think we're fine with supporting only QMake. And
basically gonna hit everyone on the head and make them use QMake, then yeah, just support QMake.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, QML project types cannot build. I mean, like, even if you provide the source code, then it's really, it's not that easy.
No, there is no way. I mean, QML project is a non-buildable project, and that's a problem. That's a problem with the as I'm like ranting it, that it's, for example, the internationalization is a problem with QML project.
Yeah.
I get it, right, fine. I've lost that war. Fine, make everyone use QMake. I hate it. I understand.
We came with a very nice compromise. Okay, we're all happy with the solution that we come up with. So let's walk away and really content.
Yeah, we've made the sale, walk off the lot at this point.
And actually, you got a promise that we will do integrate this UCS to the SDK. First, starting from the command line level and adding there. At the end of the line, it's going to be a right click. I want to insert a UCS component and giving a nice UI for it. That might require some plugin hack around, but that's the end of the road. In the beginning, we will do a bit like manual stuff, the way how you do it now, like UCS install, and then the application will just build.
Yeah, that's the idea. Start off with simple command line tools and everything, and then the SDK can use those tools, and everything works.
Yeah, brilliant. Guys,
okay.
Time. I love working with you.
Feels like we invented an idea and now we've just assigned it to the SDK team, which I'm basically fine with.
Of course you are. No, this is solving one of the biggest problem I have with our application development model since the very beginning. So I do like this UCS.
Excellent. Totally successful then.
Well, all right.
Right. Next
Thank
session.
you very much for that. Good night.
Okay.
Yeah. Thanks, guys.
Cheers.
Cheers.